Welcome to the Sexy Aging Podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Minnoch. I started this podcast because I have a fascination with healthy aging, and I'm constantly searching for guests to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire you to live an incredible second half of your life. So it's not surprising that I stumbled across the topic of menopause, and down the rabbit hole I went. If you started listening to this podcast from the very first episode, you'll actually be joining me on the journey of discovering what menopause is and how best to support our menopause symptoms. And if you're new here, welcome. Before we kick off, can I just ask a wee favour from you? Would you mind giving a rating to this podcast? And if you are inclined, leave a review. I'm an indie podcaster, which means that this podcast is a passion project with minimal marketing budget, and having your review means that the podcast can be pushed into the ears of others that really need this information. Plus, it's motivating for me to keep scheduling in interviews and releasing topics that you might be interested in. So, thanks. Welcome to the first Sexy Aging Podcast episode of 2025, and a very timely topic amongst being more consistent with fitness training, going to bed earlier, cutting back on sugar, etc. We have a topic that I am dabbling with right now, which is cutting back on alcohol. My menopausal friends and I have spoken on this a number of times. Should we stop? Should we not? And the many options that we might want to try to replace that glass of wine after 5 p.m. most nights. So welcome to the show, Ange Chappel. Ange is the founder and CEO of a company. It's an app called Mind the Sip. Ange is also a fellow Kiwi living in Australia. She's created this app which helps us track our alcohol intake, and a lot more to it than that. So I am looking forward to having a conversation with you, Ange, around this kind of, I don't know whether it's because I'm in this stage of life having these conversations that it might be trending, or whether it's actually a thing, and maybe you can give us a little bit more bandwidth around what's happening with people and their relationship with alcohol. So let's start with who are you and why have you decided to ditch alcohol?
Okay, well, thanks. Lovely intro. Yes, I am a Kiwi. On paper, I am Australian. By accent and rugby team, I am a Kiwi. And I didn't find out that I was born in Australia until I was 11. And I was horrified. I grew up in Wellington. And we went to go on a trip. And I looked at this passport and I said, what does this mean? Place of birth, Hobart. They were like, oh yeah,
wow,
you were born in Australia. So for my whole life, I went to school and uni and grew up in New Zealand. So yes, by accent and rugby team, I am a Kiwi, but I am living here in Australia, and the Australian drinking culture is very, very similar to the New Zealand drinking culture. So I pretty much switched from one place of excessive drinking to another, and there was just no break in that drinking for me. After one particularly long lunch, it was a friend's 40th, I woke up and just thought, I am done. And I am sure you have felt that way before. I also have so many times and still jumped back on that wagon. But this time was different. You're right. I was in my 40s. I was midlife, I guess you would say. And it just felt so monotonous. And for me, there was no big rock bottom moment. And I think that's really important because people think, look,
I was going to ask about that. I was going to say, was there one particular thing that made you go, hell no, I need to, put a lid on this? So
no, it was gradual. And I think that's a really good thing to share because you don't need this big dramatic moment. You don't need a tap on the shoulder from a concerned loved one. You don't need to have shown up at hospital with some injury or anything dramatic to decide that alcohol is just no longer serving you. So for me, it was just saturated everywhere. It was in every catch up. It was in a good day, a bad day. When I was ironing, oh, maybe I'll do that with a glass of wine. It'll make it a bit more interesting. When I was decluttering the house, I mean, it felt like that was adding some value and made the task more fun. But we're so conditioned that it just became so ingrained and so normalized. And after this particular long lunch, I just thought, I don't want to feel this way again. My son at the time was about 11, and he asked me, have you ever been hungover? And I honestly just thought, I have been given the greatest gift. I have two kids, so he was 11, my daughter would have been 9. And at that point, They had never questioned why we had to catch an Uber home and go back the next day for the car, why I was really loud and vivacious at family catch-ups, why I was laying in bed instead of playing. They hadn't picked that up. And I just really felt quite clear in that moment. I thought, right, my kids will never see me hungover, and they never have. And from that moment forward, I just reassessed how it was showing up and how much I was consuming.
Yeah. Wow, there's so much of that to unpack. And one of the things I want to just reiterate is something you mentioned about making the daily tasks more interesting. And I feel like a lot of women can really, and men can resonate with this. It's like, when you've got the ironing or when you're cooking dinner. For me, this has been a really big thing. Like, I'm the one that's going to be cooking dinner because everyone else is out and it's kind of falls on me. But I enjoy it way more when I've got this glass of wine with me and it's like just one. But then you go, well, this is the thing that I do when I cook dinner, which then turns into 4 or 5 nights a week. And I can say, that was probably me about 2 years ago. That frequency level of one glass of wine, at least 4 or 5 nights a week. And a lot of people would say, well, that's within sort of the recommendations, but we know that this is changing as well. Like just as recent as last week, I saw that in the US, the physician report or something that comes out that says that, alcohol is linked to breast cancer and increases in breast cancer. And I just like a little bit of a mental clap in my head because I had been exploring that kind of content as well. But it does make you kind of reflect back on your journey and your relationship with alcohol.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about something that you and I have probably got that's quite similar, which is university days in New Zealand. And I just want to also highlight that there was no social media.
No, thank God. Thank goodness. You had to take out your big digital camera and upload a whole album to Facebook if you wanted any evidence of anything.
Yeah, we had the instant cameras, and you had to take out the film and take it down to the photo shop and get it. And if you could afford it, being a poor student, then you would pay for the photos. But I can remember / not remember a lot of really big nights out at Otago. If there are any Kiwis listening, they'll probably go, yeah, there's something about that place that is just rife for alcohol indulgence, and it doesn't matter whether you're a guy or a girl, it's equal across the board. Was that your experience as well?
Oh, 100%. So when we were growing up in New Zealand, if you really think back, the legal drinking age back then was actually 20.
Yes.
Can you remember that? It was 20.
Yeah, I do remember, but we started at 15.
I was going to say,
14,
yes,
15.
that's right. However, it changed to 18 on my 20th birthday. That's why it is so ingrained in my mind. But that's interesting because, you're talking about uni days. Well, often you start uni when you are 18, and so there was definitely a blind eye to it. There were multiple uni bars. Presumably everybody had fake ID, on the ready. And really there was that culture of half-price drinks, Wild Wednesdays, Thirsty Thursdays. Then, of course, you'll be drinking Friday, Saturday, and Sunday because that was a given. It was, again, centered around alcohol. It's quite wild, really. And, you could at 20, by 20, you could vote, you could have sex, you could get married, you could smoke, but you couldn't drink. And I remember at the time thinking, that is absurd. And knowing what I know now, and like you're saying, talking about the health guidelines, there was a real level of protection that was just, health protection that was just completely discredited and overlooked because we didn't want to see or hear that. And also at that age, you're feeling very invincible. And I think that's why, you're saying, is there a shift now, or is it just something that's on your radar and people in this demographic? Well, there's a few things there. Our demographic, so for the ages of 50 plus, so there's different age categories. So 50 plus drinks 3 times more than any other age category.
I would agree with that. Absolutely.
3 times more.
Without question. Yeah. And it's not even like if you go out for lunch or you go out for dinner or you go to someone's house or whatever. there's not even a question that you wouldn't be drinking.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like more common that you would. And I sort of feel like just from my own personal interactions and lifestyle that it would be 75 to 80% of people 50 plus that I interact with would be drinking, and that would be totally normal and there'd be no conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
I
drinking
agree.
in excess.
Yeah.
You know, binge drinking in our 40s and 50s and 60s. When you actually stop and listen to it, so it's not necessarily the 20-year-olds that are binge drinking anymore.
Yeah.
It's the 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds, the 60-year-olds. It's actually a really cringe category to be in. Why
Yeah.
are we still binge drinking? This is absurd.
We're bingey cringy.
It's yeah. So
Yeah.
there you go. And linking back to what you said about cancer, alcohol is a class 1 carcinogen. Now, I'm not here to discredit, alcohol per se or cast this evil spell over it, but more the awareness. It is a contributor to 7 forms of cancer, and one is breast cancer. Now, my mum, sadly, she passed last October, but she had breast cancer 3 times. And I asked her, did your specialist ever mention the link with alcohol? And she said, never. No? What? Like that's not a thing? It's like, it is a thing. Now, I'm happy to say, well, happy sad, but a girlfriend of mine has actually just gone through treatment for cancer. She's just finished her chemo. She was told by 3 separate specialists about that link. So things have changed.
Yeah.
And they are changing. And it's not to say if you drink alcohol, you are going to get breast cancer. It's if you are susceptible to breast cancer, or it's, it gives you a higher risk of it presenting in your body. And we're talking more than 1 glass of wine a night. So if you're having 2 or more a night, we're not talking about half a bottle of Jim Beam. It's sneaky, and really it is scary and alarming, and a great health prevention and prioritizing your health. Here we are moving our bodies, eating well, doing all the right things, and then drinking ethanol.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to jump on what you just said about here we are doing all the right things. I actually feel like this was, for me, one of the last aha moments in really elevating my health gains for the future. So I'm going to be 55 this year. Ange, I can't even think about how I relate to that number 55, whatever that is. But in the last couple of years, I've super doubled down on a few health things. And one of those is actually watching my sugar intake, because sugar causes inflammation in the body. And we know that when a woman goes through menopause, it's an inflammatory response. So why would you be adding fuel to the fire? Sugar, basically. So I thought, okay, if I can just slowly start to decrease the amount of sugar. And then I started looking at a couple of things that were going into my diet that I didn't really think about the sugar content. And the first one was wine. And the second one was high sugar alternative milks in my coffee, right?
Yeah.
Which I absolutely love. But I don't want to talk about that because I need to have something that I really love.
Yes.
But so I thought, well, if I am going to start cutting back on sugar, I also need to cut back on my alcohol intake, because that for me is the health aspect of it. It's not the feeling like I'm going to miss out socially. It's not the feeling like I'm not going to fit in because I'm going to go to someone's 50th and everyone else is drinking and I'm not. It's not that for me. It really came down to the health thing and the frequency of science and data that has started to come out to show the negative impact of alcohol in the body. I mean, just think about it. I started drinking, and you can totally relate to this, and a lot of people listening will relate to this, probably about 14, 15 and this is in front of my parents who allowed me to have Miami wine cooler. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Miami wine coolers, they were the best.
They were the best. And because they were low alcohol, lower in alcohol percentage, they would allow me to have a glass or whatever in front of them. And that I actually feel that was a kind of a normal upbringing in New Zealand, or introduction to alcohol. Like a young 14, 15-year-old boy might have a beer with his dad. Like that would not be uncommon, right? And if you're thinking about countries like Europe, that would be the same, except they just have a totally different, cultural attitude towards alcohol.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So when it starts happening that you're 14 or 15, that's okay. And then you're going out with your friends and somehow you manage to, take that from the fridge at home and then everyone's drinking it at the beach. And that's sort of the ramp up to the negative journey with alcohol that I would have had.
Correct.
By the time I left home, probably like yourself, you go away to university because the university close to you doesn't have the course that you need to do. And then it's free for all, baby. It's like, that's how you make friends. That's how you connect with people. That's what's done. But for women of our generation, that plants the experience of alcohol. It's like, it's binge drinking, it's party time. She's the good time girl. She's the one that makes everybody laugh. She can drink the boys under the table. So a lot of those things is like a rite of passage. And I was probably one of those girls. And I feel like that when you can start to look back on that and instead of look back on it with pride, but understand that there's real health implications. What have I done to my liver? Right?
Yeah. Well, the good news is that your liver can self-repair.
Yeah.
So that is good news. But there are so many things in that. The first one is parents exposing their kids to alcohol at younger age. There is a school of thought that it exposes them and offers them it in a safe environment. It has been, and so that they go on to drink less. That has been discredited. We are walking living proof that, that wasn't our culture. It was a gateway to be able to green light those drinks on the beach or in the park or whatever it was. And we knew we weren't drinking correctly. We knew we were in excess because we were sneaking it, So that has been discredited. The pick-me attitude that we had, keeping up with the boys, it was the social inclusion. And this is one of the key moments. I'm sure your listeners will really relate to this. A lot of people drink back then, but also now because of social anxiety. And they feel like they just need it as a little bit of a social lubricant. And when you were a teenager, you felt accepted. You would do that. You'll go along with it. You felt accepted. You had shared stories and tales and whatnot. But it was coming from a place of peer pressure. And another thing that I hated hearing growing up, peer pressure. It sounded so dorky, but you, in some of those situations, you really didn't have a choice. Of course you did, but you felt like you didn't because you just wanted to fit in. You wanted to be the same. You wanted to go along and keep up. But the situations we put ourselves in were so dangerous.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, I think a lot of people have some pretty hairy stories. And to think that some of those could have been avoided, this is not victim blaming at all, but as in the situations we put ourselves in, and some of those things could have been avoided if we just slowed down to think, is this something I want? Do I actually want to be drinking in excess in the situation? Do I know these people that well? I don't know. There was no room for pause. It just, that's what you did and that's what you continued to do. And when you first were exposed to alcohol, it was disgusting, right? That's why the Miami wine coolers were great. And now it's vodka cruisers or whatever, because they tasted like lolly water.
Like soda. Yeah.
Yeah. And you really had to push through. And then when wine was introduced as this level of sophistication almost, it was gross. When you first tried a sip of wine, be honest, it tasted gross, right?
Yeah.
And then you pushed through. And then somewhere you went from teenage binge drinking, in inverted commas, to sophisticated wine tours, which often ended up in complete carnage anyway. But because you were talking about the lovely notes and undertones of gooseberry, it was different for some reason. And also the price tags. Well, I only drink French champagne now because I get an instant hangover from Prosecco, or just the things we tell ourselves. It's the same stuff, right?
And I think I've said all of those things to myself, like absolutely all of them.
Yeah. And I think we just need to be kind to ourselves and really unpack and unpick what we've been sold. Because, we really have been sold that it is sophisticated that we need it for connection, that we need it for celebration, that we need it for commiseration. It's just tone deaf.
Your complete midlife and menopause health coach is here. The Sexy Aging Health and Fitness app has everything you'll need for this stage of your life and beyond. Personalised fitness training programs that build lean muscle from beginners to advanced. Personalised nutrition where you can choose from vegan, vegetarian, dairy-free, gluten-free, the menopause meal plan and more. There are education videos that help you understand menopause symptoms. There are new weekly Workout With Me videos added as bonus extras. You can do sprint interval training and HIIT workouts and train your balance, mobility, agility and core. Wait, there's more. Mental health video series, a personalised chat function, menopause symptom tracker, period tracker and a community group. You'll be able to ditch all the individual apps you've got stored on your phone taking up space and use the Sexy Aging app for all of it. This is a monthly subscription-based program with the option to cancel or pause at any time. There are 2 types of monthly subscriptions. One is for fitness workouts only and the other is all-inclusive. And there's an exclusive 20% discount off your first month subscription with the code PODCAST. So check the link in the show notes that will take you to the info page to find out more.
Honestly, we don't. It's the people we're connecting with. It's the event that we're celebrating. It's the small details. Like take a wedding, for example. I've been to so many weddings now, alcohol-free, and they are the best. Like initially you think, how could I ever not drink at a wedding? Well, you actually get to see all the little details on the table. You get to listen to the speeches and really zone in on them. You get to see them cutting the cake instead of going, there was a cake. You get to see them do their first dance. You get to dance. It's all of the things that make up a beautiful moment. Out of all of those things, alcohol is the most insignificant of all of those. And it's the one that causes the most harm.
Yeah.
You then feel initially maybe a bit fun. You feel like, yay, yes, we're getting amongst it. But then that wears off. When that dopamine wears off, you can't actually reach that same level after you've had one, and then you're still chasing that. And your body is not being able to process the ethanol as quickly, and as you're consuming. And then you're waking up dehydrated with anxiety and regret and thinking, oh, what did I say? And what did I do? And why? It's really important to just ask yourself, why do I feel like I need alcohol to enjoy this moment?
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I am listening to what you're saying and I really resonate. And then I'm also checking in on myself right now as I'm hearing what you're saying and going, okay, why have I not completely abstained from alcohol? And I think that's a journey that I'm going to be taking this year. One of the things I did do, which we'll talk about soon, is I connected with your app.
Yes.
And that has given me quite a lot of insight into my relationship with alcohol, what's happening. One of the cool things, obviously, is how much money I'm saving.
Yeah.
But I just want to actually go into something that I feel is quite important for a big proportion of listeners to this particular app, Sexy Aging, is the impact on alcohol drinking and menopause symptoms.
Yeah.
So we know, and from personal experience, that when I drink alcohol, it would take me 3 glasses of wine, which is quite a lot now for me, but that would have been a normal night out.
Oh, that would have been a light night out.
Yeah. But now if it's 3, and I don't even think I can get to 4 because the taste sets in where I just can't deal. But if I have about 3 glasses, which has been a really long time since I've done that, to be honest, I know that I'm going to wake up at about 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Hot, sweating, headachy, really anxious. Like, it's an anxiety, not a regret about what did I say and what did I do.
No.
But it's an anxiety of, oh no, all these things.
Why
are
did I
go
put my
wrong.
body through this?
Why do I do this to myself? And I
Yeah.
knew that I was doing it to myself. And I feel like that's probably that was the juxt and the crossroads in my relationship with menopause was like just not wanting that anymore. Like I do not want to feel that. And the anxiety, when you're not an anxious person and then you just have you're out at a party or a dinner and you're celebrating, you're having a couple of glasses of champagne and you're going to pay for it. not necessarily the hangover, because you just deal with it with water,
Yes.
but it comes back on you the next day. You just have this incredible low vibe,
Yeah.
this real low energy, and these terrible thoughts in your head. And it just feels like if alcohol, I mean, I compare it like, I guess, to a drug.
Well, it is a drug.
Right? Well, I don't do drugs. So,
Yeah.
you hear about people having the low after the high. It feels very similar, I think.
It's funny. It is the only drug that people question you as to why you're
when
not
you
doing
don't
it.
have it. Yeah.
People aren't saying to you, you don't smoke weed? Why? Why aren't you smoking pot? Why?
And
Like,
menopause, we should be.
you're not having heroin? Why?
Yeah.
Sure, like it's just, why are we questioned over alcohol? It's wild. But let's talk about sleep disruption with alcohol and menopause, because alcohol just on its own, with menopause even out of the equation, is known to disrupt your sleep cycles. You can never reach proper REM sleep when you have alcohol in your system. So often people say, oh, I just have a glass of wine before bed. It helps me sleep. And it does actually help you go to sleep. That it doesn't help you in a deep REM sleep. So, of course, menopause already brings challenges like insomnia and night sweats, and combining the two just severely impacts that rest and recovery. Exactly what you're talking about, making women, just really aware of that choice. The other one with alcohol and menopause, I mean, there are so many, but hormonal changes. So, of course, during menopause, you've got these fluctuating hormones anyway, particularly estrogen, and, it can amplify the effects of alcohol. So this can lead to that sort of increased sensitivity that you're talking about, stronger hangovers, and more noticeable mood swings after drinking. You've got that level of irritability as it is. We really don't need to be adding fuel to the fire with our body then trying to process alcohol on top of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks for that, for backing me up on that one.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like if you're
brain fog and clarity, and another symptom, that desire for clarity and energy. We're trying to reduce that brain fog.
Yeah, not make it worse.
Not make it worse.
Yeah. Hey, I want to get to some really meaty stuff about your top tips for adjusting alcohol intake, because obviously you've gone through this journey and you're at a place now where I'm assuming you don't have any alcohol in your life.
That is correct. So I actually haven't had any alcohol for over a year now, but what I really want to put out there is my biggest takeaway, if you're going to take one thing from this, is that change takes time. So I did not wake up from that long lunch and have that conversation with my son and think, that's it, and not drink since. That was over 3 years ago, right? So it took 2 years of being really mindful of my choices, which is the tips I can impart with you now. And then after 2 years of working on myself and tapering down, which I'll get to the strategies, I was then firmly in the take it or leave it camp, and more so in the leave it. And so I just thought, this one glass of bubbles that I'm enjoying, in inverted commas, at a social function or whatever, is adding zero value. I'm just not going to have it. So I tapered down so much. So let's get started with these strategies. But that is the first one. Change takes time. Okay, it's like downloading the Sexy Aging app, right?
Yeah.
You're not downloading that and the next day, you've got a tight peach and abs of steel. Like, if only. You have
I'm going to say we're like 2 years. 2 years of just being consistent, and you will really notice a difference, especially without hormones.
Exactly. So the first one is to set realistic goals. Now, for me, that was cutting it in half by 50%. That's where I started. Okay, so I was having 2 margaritas, say, and 2 glasses of red on a Friday night. So that was what I thought was 4 drinks. We're going to get onto standard drinks later, but I was wanting to cut that in half. Right? That is achievable. I'm not white knuckling it through. I'm not saying I can't have a drink, so I won't drink. I'm tapering down. My goal was 50%. So that was 1 margarita and 1 glass of red wine. That was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then I decided, right, let's take a day out. So it was 2 days, and then it was 1 day. And then over time it was, okay, I'm going to try an alcohol-free weekend. Now I'm going to go really all out and try an alcohol-free holiday. That was very hard.
Whoa.
Right? But you really set yourself these small challenges. So that's the first one. Just set realistic goals. Right. Let's talk standard drinks. The next one is tracking what you are actually consuming. Mm-hmm. So those 4 drinks, in actual fact, were 9.2 standard drinks.
Yeah.
Right. 9.2.
I've seen that on your app. I can see how it works. So, yeah.
And the weekly recommendations for females in New Zealand is 10. So I was basically having the weekly limit in one night. And if you were having that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which is very easy to do, or 3 times a week, it doesn't have to be just those particular days, that's 3 times the recommended limit. Noting, remember that 0 is the safest amount, okay? That's the recommended limit for health prevention, right? For protecting your health when alcohol, obviously no amount of alcohol is healthy or safe. So it's really important to know what you are actually consuming. And it's quite eye-opening. The next one is to journal how you're feeling. And this is key. This is when people say you've got to put in the work. This is really key. I'm not talking about scrolls of journaling. You need to establish why you are wanting alcohol in that moment. So there is a journal in app, but you can obviously just use a physical journal if you want to write a little note and do it manually. How do you feel before going into an event? I'm looking forward to having this glass of wine. I feel like, what is it going to give you? How do you feel after you've had the drink? I felt comfortable having that drink. I stuck to my limit, or it didn't add any value. I ended up waking up in the middle of the night. Really track and journal how you're feeling, because it is important later on to establish the need that you are trying to meet. So there is an exercise I do. It sounds quite long-winded to begin with, but it's really not. It's a split second. In the moment, if I have a craving for alcohol, and you can continue to have cravings for years, really importantly, in those first 2 weeks, the cravings are high. Those first 3 months, they're still very high. When you're having a craving for alcohol, ask yourself, what need am I trying to meet? Am I bored? Am I sad? Have I had a bad day at work? Right? Establish the emotion that you are trying to meet. Then think about other things that you can do that is actually going to meet that need. People often say, go for a walk around the block, or, exercise. Well, that's not always practical in the moment, especially, if you're looking after children or grandkids or whatever. You can't just, sorry, guys, I'm just about to go for a little jog around the block, right? But maybe it is quickly phoning a friend, having a chat about anything, not about your craving, just about what's going on in their day. Having a cup of tea, running a hot bath. Maybe you need a hug. Maybe you need a cry. There's so many other things. So really try and establish what need you are trying to meet. It's one of the breakthrough moments. Once you can do that, it changes everything. Yeah. Become acquainted with Sober Curious resources. So there is a stack of podcasts inside the app. There is Quitlet, which is a genre of literature. It stands for quit literature. So people's stories on alcohol reduction. Some of them are really personal tales, and some of them are more science-based. If you're a factual person, I highly recommend Alcohol Explained by William Porter. It is excellent. It is very factual. It will just tell you exactly alcohol and sleep, alcohol and socializing, alcohol and whatever. But there are some, I personally love hearing other people's stories. So listening to the podcasts really help. And meditation and mindfulness. So these are also in app. To begin with, I thought, no, that's not for me. There is no way I'll be able to meditate. I just pass. But I use the meditations that are guided sleep meditations. And oh my gosh, they're so good. It's like an adult sleep story. Yeah. You're laying in bed, you pop it on, and you're not up. And I mean, I need help getting to sleep despite not having touched a drop of alcohol in over a year. My sleep is still terribly disrupted. So using those to actually zone out and center myself has been lovely. So it's setting realistic goals and tapering down, tracking what you're actually consuming, journaling how you're feeling and establishing what need you are trying to meet, becoming acquainted with sober curious resources, and all of that is inside the app. You can do it all individually, which is how I started and why I built the app, because I was doing that all manually. And I thought, look, if I'm looking for something to change my relationship with alcohol and I don't want to necessarily be sober, I know I haven't had a drink now in a year, but I could if I want. There's no pressure. Then there's probably other people out there like me looking for this same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So thanks. I like all those tips. I think that we can use those and we'll really put some thought into them. And they are structured in the Mind the Sip app, which I'm going to be putting in the show links. I've just got one last question to wrap up for today.
Please.
So do you have any other insights or perspectives on alcohol today and for the future generations? Because I feel like our generation, Gen X, has had that incredibly robust experience with alcohol.
Yeah.
I mean, like you, I've got a teenage daughter. She's actually 20. Watching her journey with alcohol is interesting. I feel like it's more moderated than my experience, although hopefully she won't hear this episode.
Yeah.
What are you seeing and what's your perspective on that?
Oh, well, look, future generations, we're already seeing it, that they are embracing a more inclusive and diverse social norms. Like, it's accepted. You're vegan? Cool. You don't eat meat and dairy products. You're gluten-free? Okay, cool. People aren't forcing you to have some bread. You know, you don't drink alcohol? Okay, cool. They're a little bit more flexible. There's more social acceptance. There's not that pressure, particularly. Now, the other thing is people will feel freer to make choices that align with their values and judgments without pressure. I think we had such a pack mentality and it was just what you did and you just went along with it. And I know from my own experiences, if I met someone that didn't drink, I thought, how boring. Like, you're not for me. You are just, not for me.
You're not my person.
You are not my person. How boring. And now I am that person. And the people I meet at parties that are I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter if they're drinking or not, but the connections I have are really interesting. You hear these interesting stories. You know, you're not just writing people off because they're not drinking. What a narrow-minded view. So I think this next generation is already embracing that. There are a couple of areas that are kind of interesting. I think they're embracing more functional products, which we're maybe a little bit less au fait with. THC and, functional drinks and adaptogens. So there's that as well. I'm not talking about hard drugs. I'm talking about, plant-based.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
mushrooms, not
microdosing, and there is that has increased as well. They are really big on health and performance. Like, how many run clubs are there, and ice baths, and that just wasn't us. We worked out, and I think this will really resonate. And it's actually really sad. We worked out almost
to have a big night out.
Well, as a punishment. As in, you drank so much last night, you need to get up and burn it off.
Well, which is absolutely hazardous.
And you've done the damage. It's not you're not burning anything off, but it was that sense of trying to recorrect what you've done. And whereas now they're a little bit more like, we're getting up to watch the sunrise and then we're going to do, hot yoga. I don't know. Yeah. It's more holistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this generation knows. I mean, they don't have it all together, obviously. But in this department, it is. And then the other one is, I wonder if they've seen us, and this is a really hard pill to swallow. This is why I didn't want my kids to see me drunk, and they never have. I feel very grateful for that. But it makes me sad. There are a lot of people in our community. There's some people that are 60 plus that have said, I really regret now. My kids barely drink. I think they looked at us and felt unsafe or just embarrassed of their Yeah.
That's the word they'll use.
I know.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that is the hard truth, where we are the biggest role models for our kids. But it's never too late to make a change and to show some great perseverance. But yeah, I just wonder if it's a combination of them not wanting to repeat the same sort of cycles and patterns, experimenting with functional options, and also just this increased awareness around health and inclusion.
Yeah. Ange, thank you so much. This has been a conversation I've wanted to have for a really long time, and I'm glad that our paths crossed in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
I am actually using the SIP app because it has been on my mind for like the last year. And I'm now what I call a grey area drinker, which is I'm tracking. I might have a drink and I'll pop it into the app and I'll go, okay. Like I'm not beating myself up about it, but I'm kind of going, okay, I want to see what happens after 30 days. Like, what is that starting to look like? So I really appreciate what you've done to help people that want to move on from their relationship with alcohol, make it either a better relationship or a zero relationship, like whatever the choice is, that you have, created such a fantastic resource for us to tap into. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Tracy. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sexy Aging, and a huge thank you once again to my guest who offers their time and their knowledge. Hey, if you love this episode, go and check out some of the other ones and subscribe to the podcast so I can continue to bring you content you will love. I'd also appreciate a review if you've got a minute, and if you are watching or listening to this episode on Spotify, there is the opportunity to give specific feedback and comments on this episode. So get out there and stay sexy.